smicha in Eretz Yisrael, arguing with people or expressing a view which is clearly at odds with a view expressed by Chachamim in Bavel who did not have smicha. That itself is a question. Why don't we simply say we should follow the Talmud Yerushalmi? Because min astam, that's what the Sanhedrin in Eretz Yisrael thought. Because the end of the Talmud Yerushalmi is also the end of the time of the Sanhedrin in Eretz Yisrael. It's also an interesting question. But without even trying to answer that question, because that would take too long, if we have a Mishnah, for example, the Mishnah says X, Y, Z, and the Talmud Bavli gives an explanation, which, when looked at honestly, is very far-fetched, such as a classic kind of Talmud Bavli, Hisurei Mahasara wa Hachi Katane, right, which basically rewrites the Mishnah in a way that you would never have thought of understanding that Mishnah, left to your own devices. And I think that an intellectually honest and intelligent person sometimes should be very disturbed by such an explanation. If that was, however, the only explanation, that was the only text we had, we'd probably just have to say, well, I don't understand, but that's how it is. But if you look in the Talmud Yerushalmi, on the very same Mishnah, and you see the Talmud Yerushalmi explains the Mishnah exactly as it's written. No Hisurei Mahsara, no Hachi Katane. There's no need to introduce an entire new sentence into the Mishnah or to do mental acrobatics in order to explain what the Mishnah says. Why, on what basis would anyone claim that one has to follow the far-fetched and unlikely explanation of the Mishnah when one has a clear, straightforward and readily understood explanation of the Talmud Yerushalmi? And this perhaps, I think more than perhaps, is exactly the meaning of Rabbi Yirmiyah in the Talmud Bavli, Daf Kaf Daled, when he says, "B'mahashakim hoshivani ze Talmud asher Bavel." That's exactly what he had in mind. Now, furthermore, the words Hisurei Mahasara Wahachi Katane is Roshei Tevot Himuk, correct? What's Lehit Hamek in Hebrew? To evade. Thank you. To evade. You know what the Gra says about this? Most people never heard this, but I promise you it's written. You can check afterwards and you'll see. In the Hakdama Rabbi Yisrael Mishklov, Tamid HaGra, into his famous work, Pa'ath HaShulchan, he quotes from the Gra this statement, that the Talmud Bavli, when it does something like Hisurei Mahasara wa Hachi Katane, which often we don't understand why it's doing this. Why not just explain the Mishnah as it is? The Gra says it's because the Talmud Bavli was aware that there were other shitoth amongst the Tanaim, as often was the Talmud, usually the Talmud Yerushalmi would have been as well. But the Talmud Bavli wanted to be posek halacha, not according to the Mishnah of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, but according to another opinion amongst the Tanaim. But rather than come out and say so openly, they sidestepped this issue, and they said, well, we will inject our interpretation into the Mishnah of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, as if that's what it says in the Mishnah. So says the Gra, not I, and not some professor in some university. So says the Gra. The Gra, in other words, understood that which many people do not understand, that when the Talmud Bavli says, very often at least, Hisurei Mahasara Hachi Katane, in other words, understand the Mishnah not the way you would think it should be understood, not the way the words tell you it should be understood, but the way we're telling you now, it's not because that the Mishnah really means that at all. And the Gra says explicitly, again, look it up, you'll see, it's right there in Hakdama to Pa'ath HaShulchan. It's not because the Mishnah actually meant to say what the Talmud Bavli is saying it says. It's because the Talmud Bavli is trying to override the Psak Halacha of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, who was the head of the Sanhedrin in Eretz Yisrael, and most of the Chachamim in his Sanhedrin agreed to what his Psak Halacha in the Mishnah was, and they were trying to overrule that. Why? For what reason? Based on what logic should we be duty-bound to follow that overruling of Amorei Bavel against the Sanhedrin that was in Eretz Yisrael at the time of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi? To me, that's not very clear at all.
Can I interject that is the Rav familiar with the work of David Weiss Halivni?
Yes, I am.
Okay. By the same token,
Harav Gaon, Professor David Halivni, Shlitta.
Okay, so by the same token, Rav Bar-Hayim would have no animadversions per se to follow the conclusions that Rav Halivni has in his Makorat Masarot in terms of.
I'm familiar with his writings. I've also heard him speak. I think a person who has a true understanding of the Talmud Bavli, or wishes to achieve a true understanding of the Talmud Bavli, in other words, how this text came about, how was it formed, how was it written, over what period of time, must become familiar with the writings, with the work of Harav Gaon David Halivni Shlitta. And I personally believe that his Shita, his approach to understanding the Talmud Bavli and how the Amoraim in Bavel worked, and how the Talmud Bavli then interprets or tries to explain the statements of the Amoraim, I believe his approach is correct, based on hundreds upon hundreds of sugyoth and proofs that he brings. It's a very difficult thesis to reject.
Accepts his notion of later stamayim, and he accepts the whole concept.
I don't know what it means to accept. There is a fact. The Talmud Bavli contains a huge percentage of. Let's just state the facts. The facts are there are a huge number of statements. I'm not going to give it a percentage now, but there are a very high percentage of statements in the Talmud Bavli or explanations that appear without any name attached to them. An intelligent person must ask himself, surely, who said this?
Okay, I understand, but the Torah world, the Rosh Yeshiva of Kook, even though the terminology was invented later by Rabbi David Weiss Halivni, but the Torah world has not even used his terminology in explaining halacha and other such things. You will not find any Rabbanim using the concept of stamayim.
Why do you say that? Do you know all the Rabbanim in the world? Have you spoken to them all? Have you asked them all? You mean to say that the Rabbanim with whom you are familiar, they don't tend to think that way.
Let me clarify myself, please. Okay, I imagine that there's a Bar-Hayim in that computer.
Yes.
I think if you write the word stamayim, and you did a search on all the Rabbanim in the Bar-Hayim, I do not think you will find it. Maybe I'm wrong. I never did it.
I haven't done it either.
Do money. That's true. I've never seen it in the thousands of Sfarim that I have read. I think that, are there some Rabbanim that quoted in a tshuva? I've never seen a tshuva